Forget everything you thought you knew about Alexander Hamilton. It's late in 1792, and Hamilton sits alone in his Treasury office, candlelight catching the edges of another letter he shouldn't be writing. The Republic is barely a decade old. George Washington is still president. The Constitution, Hamilton's Constitution, the one he fought for in 85 essays, is still new enough to smell like fresh ink and compromise. And Alexander Hamilton is terrified. Not of the British, not of debt, though there's plenty of that. He's terrified of something the musical never quite names, something buried in his private letters and late-night correspondence. Hamilton feared that the United States of America was sliding, quietly and inevitably, toward an American king. How could the man who wrote Energy in the Executive be the same man haunted by the specter of monarchy? How could someone who pushed for a strong central government spend sleepless nights worrying that strength itself would corrupt into a crown? The answer changes everything we think we know about what he built and why. Let's start with the version most of us carry around. Alexander Hamilton, immigrant, Revolutionary War hero, Washington's right hand, author of The Financial System, the guy who got shot by Aaron Burr. If you've seen the musical, you know him as brilliant, abrasive, ambitious, maybe a little too ambitious. The Federalist who wanted big government, strong banks, and didn't trust the common people to run things. That's not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete in a way that matters. What almost never makes it into the popular story is this. Hamilton didn't just want a strong executive because he loved power. He wanted it because he'd seen what happens when you don't have one. And more than that, he'd seen what fills the vacuum when republics collapse. The thing that kept him writing letters late into the night. The thing that shaped every major decision he made after the war wasn't ambition. It was a very specific fear that America would fail the way republics always fail, by begging someone to save them. And that person, inevitably, would become a king in everything but name. To understand Hamilton's nightmare, you have to go back to the world he was born into, the 1750s, a British colonial island in the Caribbean, born out of wedlock to a mother who'd been abandoned and a father who'd disappear. Illegitimate, poor, surrounded by the machinery of empire, sugar plantations, enslaved people, merchant ships, and the distant weight of the British crown making every rule. He saw how monarchies worked up close, not the romantic version, the version where your birth determined everything, where power flowed from bloodlines, where a king's word was law and there was no appeal. When Hamilton came to New York and threw himself into the revolution, he wasn't just fighting for independence, he was fighting against that system. The system where one person's will eclipsed everything else. But here's what haunted him. He'd also seen the chaos when authority broke down completely. During the war, as Washington's aide-de-camp, Hamilton watched the Continental Army nearly disintegrate multiple times. Soldiers unpaid, sometimes unfed, states refusing to send supplies, Congress barely functional. He saw how close the revolution came to collapsing, not because of British strength, but because of American weakness. And weakness, Hamilton understood, was just another path to monarchy. When people are desperate enough, frightened enough, hungry enough, they'll accept anyone who promises order, even a tyrant, especially a tyrant. So let's go to the documents, because Hamilton left us a record of exactly what he feared and why. The Federalist Papers, written in 1787 and 1788 to defend the new Constitution, are where Hamilton laid out his thinking most clearly. Numbers 67 through 77 are his, focused on the executive branch, and if you read them carefully, there's a tension running through every page. In Federalist 70, Hamilton makes his most famous argument. Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. He's arguing for a single president, not a committee, for 4-year terms, not annual elections, for the power to act quickly in crisis. And his critics pounced. Anti-Federalists like Cato and Brutus wrote furious responses, accusing Hamilton of designing an elected monarchy. They pointed to the president's veto power, the commander-in-chief role, the fact that there was no limit on re-election. This is a king, they said, with a different title. But here's what they missed, and what Hamilton kept trying to explain. He wasn't designing a king. He was designing a firewall against one. Read Federalist 69, where Hamilton directly compares the American president to the British monarch. The president can be impeached. The king cannot. The president shares treaty power with the Senate. The king makes treaties alone. The president commands the military, but cannot raise armies without Congress. The king does both. Every single power Hamilton gave to the executive, he also hemmed in, not because he loved checks and balances as an abstract principle, but because he'd seen what happens when power concentrates without limits. In a letter to James Duane in 1780, years before the Constitution, Hamilton wrote about the danger of weak central authority. He'd watched the Confederation Congress beg states for money and soldiers and get refused. He'd watched foreign powers, Britain, France, Spain, circle like vultures, knowing America couldn't defend itself. But in that same letter, he warned about the opposite danger. Give all power to the many, he wrote. They will oppress the few. Give all power to the few. They will oppress the many. The key word is all. Hamilton feared concentration of power anywhere, in any hands, for any reason. What he wanted was tension, competing interests forced to negotiate, a structure where ambition checked ambition, as Madison would later phrase it in Federalist 51. But structures don't protect themselves. That was Hamilton's real fear, that Americans would get tired of the hard work of balancing power and just hand it to someone who promised to make the complexity go away. March 1783, Newburgh, New York. The war is technically over, but the army hasn't been paid in months. Officers are furious. Some are talking about marching on Congress. Others are whispering about something worse, making Washington king, not as a joke, as a serious proposal. The so-called Newburgh Conspiracy was a near mutiny that almost ended the revolution in a military coup. Anonymous letters suggesting that if Congress wouldn't pay them, they should take what they were owed, and if Congress resisted, they should replace Congress with someone who understood strength, someone like General Washington. Hamilton knew about this. He was still in his 20s, but he'd left Washington's staff by then and was serving in Congress. He wrote to Washington, carefully, warning him that there were forces trying to use the Army's grievances for their own ends. He urged Washington to address the officers directly, to calm the situation, but also to demand that Congress actually pay the soldiers. And Washington did. In one of the most crucial moments in American history, Washington walked into that meeting hall in Newburgh, took out his prepared speech, and then did something no one expected. He pulled out a pair of reading glasses, new glasses, ones the officers had never seen him wear, and said, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." Men who'd planned a coup started crying. Washington dismantled the conspiracy in that moment. He reminded them what they'd fought for. He promised to advocate for their pay, but he made clear that the army would not become a political force. They would not be the tool that ended the republic. Hamilton learned something that day. He learned that the American king they all feared wasn't going to come from Britain. It was going to come from inside, from justified anger, real grievances, and the terrible logic that maybe what America needed was a strong hand instead of a complicated system of representation. The crown wouldn't be imposed, it would be invited. 4 years later, in 1786 and 1787, Hamilton watched his nightmare play out again from a different angle. Shays' Rebellion. Massachusetts farmers, crushed by debt and taxes, rose up against the state government. They shut down courts to prevent foreclosures. They marched on the federal arsenal at Springfield. For weeks, it looked like the state might collapse into civil war. The Confederation Congress, weak and broke, couldn't help. Massachusetts had to raise its own militia to put down the rebellion. They did, eventually, but the message was clear. The national government was a fiction. States were on their own. Hamilton saw this and drew exactly the opposite conclusion from the one you might expect. Most elites looked at Shays' rebellion and said, "See, the people can't be trusted. They're a mob. We need more control from the top." Hamilton looked at Shays' rebellion and said, "See, when government is too weak to address real problems, when courts are corrupt and taxes are crushing, and there's no national system to balance things out, people turn to violence. And when violence becomes the only language that works, someone will eventually promise to restore order with an iron fist." In a letter to George Washington in 1787, just before the Constitutional Convention, Hamilton wrote that America was upon the eve of a general revolution, which will either end in restoring us to full liberty or plunging us into perfect despotism. Those were his words. Perfect despotism, not as a distant threat, as the natural next step if the Constitution failed. He didn't fear mob rule because he thought ordinary people were stupid. He feared mob rule because he knew desperate people would accept anything that promised stability. And the person who provided that stability, whether through the barrel of a gun or the force of charisma, would become the thing the revolution was supposed to prevent. An American king, not in title but in function. Now here's where the irony becomes almost unbearable. While Hamilton was writing these warnings, while he was arguing that a strong executive was the only thing preventing chaos from birthing tyranny, his political enemies were calling him a monarchist. Thomas Jefferson, reading Hamilton's economic plans from his post as Secretary of State, became convinced that Hamilton was deliberately trying to recreate the British system. The National Bank, the funding of state debts, the excise taxes, the close relationship with wealthy merchants. To Jefferson, it looked like Hamilton was building a financial aristocracy that would eventually demand political power to match. James Madison, Hamilton's co-author on the Federalist Papers, broke with him completely over this. By the early 1790s, Madison was writing letters describing Hamilton as someone who'd avowed the British Constitution to be the best in the world. They weren't entirely wrong to be worried. Hamilton did praise aspects of the British system. He did think a Senate with longer terms could provide stability. He did want a president who could act decisively without constantly checking public opinion. But they were wrong about why. Hamilton wasn't trying to recreate monarchy. He was trying to prevent the conditions that make people beg for one. He thought a functioning economy, a strong credit system, and a government that could actually do things would make Americans stable enough, prosperous enough, that they wouldn't need to look for saviors. Jefferson and Madison feared corruption from the top. Hamilton feared collapse from below. Both fears were real. Both were drawing on history. Hamilton looked at Roman generals and saw Caesar. Jefferson looked at European courts and saw George III. The tragedy is that they were arguing about the same nightmare from different angles. Neither of them wanted an American king, but they couldn't agree on which threat was more dangerous: the king who seizes power, or the king who's invited in to stop the chaos. And while they were arguing, the country was beginning to split into the first-party system. Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Each side convinced the other was ushering in the tyranny they'd fought a revolution to escape. We all know Hamilton as the founder of American finance, the man who made the dollar real. But the anxiety that kept returning to him, the one that shaped his final years, was simpler than all the complex economic plans. What if the country he'd built tools for simply chose a king anyway? Not through conquest, not through British invasion, through exhaustion, through the slow realization that self-government is hard, And maybe, just maybe, it would be easier to let one strong person handle everything. In 1798, as the quasi-war with France escalated, President John Adams appointed Hamilton as Inspector General of the Army. Effectively second in command to Washington, Hamilton was back in uniform, organizing a military expansion that looked, to his opponents, exactly like the standing army the Revolution was supposed to prevent. Jefferson wrote to Madison, "Hamilton is preparing for a reign of terror." He meant it literally. He thought Hamilton was engineering a crisis to justify military rule. Hamilton's response, in letters to friends, was almost pleading. He wasn't trying to become a general dictator. He was trying to make sure that if war came, America wouldn't collapse the way it nearly had in 1776. He was trying to prevent weakness from becoming the excuse for someone else to seize power. But he couldn't make Jefferson see it, and Jefferson couldn't make Hamilton see his fear. Each man was so focused on his own nightmare that he couldn't recognize the others as legitimate. They were both right, and that might be the most important lesson of all. The American king can come from too much power concentrated at the top, or from chaos at the bottom that makes people desperate for order. History provides examples of both. Hamilton spent his political life trying to prevent the second, while Jefferson spent his trying to prevent the first. And the system they created together, arguing bitterly every step of the way, put enough barriers in place that neither nightmare quite came true. Not in their lifetime, anyway. The presidential election, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, both Democratic Republicans, tie in the Electoral College. Under the Constitution, the choice goes to the House of Representatives. The Federalist-controlled House. Hamilton's party could decide the presidency, and Hamilton despises both candidates. He'd been fighting Jefferson for a decade. He thought Jefferson's ideas about states' rights and limited government were naive at best, dangerous at worst. He'd written essays attacking Jefferson's record as governor of Virginia during the war, calling him weak in crisis. But Aaron Burr was different. In a letter to James Bayard, a Federalist congressman, Hamilton wrote, "Burr loves nothing but himself, thinks of nothing but his own aggrandizement, and will be content with nothing short of permanent power in his own hands." Not policy disagreements, not philosophical differences. Hamilton was warning about character, about ambition without principle, about the kind of person who would say whatever needed to be said, promise whatever needed to be promised, to acquire power, and then never let it go. In another letter to Gouverneur Morris, Hamilton called Burr a man of irregular and insatiable ambition who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. He urged every Federalist who would listen to vote for Jefferson instead. Some refused. They thought Jefferson was worse. They thought his states' rights philosophy would destroy the Union. Hamilton kept pushing. He wrote letter after letter. Jefferson has principles, he argued. You can fight principles. You can debate them. You can build opposition around different ideas. But Burr had no fixed principles. Burr would reshape himself into whatever the moment required. And a person like that, Hamilton warned, was exactly how republics die. Not through ideology, but through personality. The charismatic figure who promises everything, believes nothing, and accumulates power as an end in itself. Hamilton's nightmare, the one he'd been running from his whole political life, wasn't a British king or a constitutional monarch. It was an American Caesar. Someone who would use the system's weaknesses, its divisions, its exhaustion, to make themselves indispensable, and then permanent. In Aaron Burr, Hamilton saw that figure. Not a hypothetical, not a future threat. Standing right there, one House vote away from the presidency. Hamilton threw all his remaining political capital into stopping it. He lobbied, argued, wrote letters late into the night. The same letters that would, 3 years later, help motivate Burr to demand the duel that killed him. The House eventually chose Jefferson on the 36th ballot. Hamilton's last major political act was choosing the man he'd spent a decade opposing over the man he was convinced would become a king. That's how seriously he took the threat. That's how much his entire political philosophy came down to one fear. Not that bad people would win elections, but that the right kind of bad person would win once and make sure there were no real elections ever again. So what do we do with this? Hamilton's been dead for 221 years. The British monarchy he grew up under is ceremonial now. The young republic that terrified him with its fragility is the world's oldest continuous democracy. But if you think worries about an American king belong only to powdered wigs and quill pens, look at how easily we still use that language. Strong leaders, decisive action, someone who can cut through the gridlock and just get things done. Every generation has its version of Hamilton's fear. The person who seems to offer simple solutions to complex problems. The one who says, "Trust me, give me power, and I'll fix everything you're anxious about." The one who suggests that maybe the old rules are getting in the way, and wouldn't it be better if we could just streamline things? Hamilton would recognize that pitch immediately. He'd heard it at Newburgh. He'd seen it in Shays' rebellion. He'd watched it almost work with Burr. The American king doesn't need a crown, doesn't need to officially abolish elections or rewrite the Constitution in one dramatic coup. The American king emerges slowly, through emergency powers that never expire, through opponents who are treated as enemies, through the gradual sense that this one person, only this person, can save us from the chaos. Hamilton's genius wasn't just in building financial systems or defending the Constitution. It was in understanding that republics fail from within, not through invasion or revolution, but through exhaustion. Through citizens who get tired of the mess and complexity of self-government and decide to hand the hard work to someone who promises to handle it for them. That's why he built structures with competing powers. That's why he wanted tension built into the system. Not because conflict is good, but because the alternative, unified power without opposition, is worse. The moment we decide that efficiency matters more than balance, that decisive action matters more than deliberation, that getting things done matters more than making sure power can be challenged, we're choosing Hamilton's nightmare over his dream. Hamilton's story isn't comfortable. He wasn't a simple hero or a simple villain. He wanted strong government and feared tyranny. He pushed for executive power and spent his life terrified of where that power could lead. He believed in the people enough to fight a revolution for them, but didn't trust them enough to leave systems unprotected. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the founders weren't supposed to be simple. Maybe the reason the system has held this long is precisely because it was built by people arguing from different nightmares, each trying to prevent the thing that terrified them most. If you've made it this far into a half-hour documentary on constitutional anxiety and 18th century political philosophy, you already know how this platform works. The more people engage with long-form, source-driven history, the kind that actually looks at letters and documents instead of just recycling the same stories, the more of it shows up. Not just for you, but for everyone. And if you've got sources that complicate this story or challenge it, or add layers I missed, genuinely, bring them. Arguments with receipts are exactly what history is supposed to be. Hamilton spent his life in arguments. He would have wanted you to bring yours. Because Hamilton's nightmare wasn't just about crowns and titles. It was about a country that gets tired of the hard work of self-government and begs someone to rule it instead. The structures he built can stop a lot of things, but they can't stop that. Only we can. And we don't get to stop fighting that fight. Not ever. Because the moment we do, someone will be waiting to wear the crown we swore we'd never create.